Hello and good evening. Welcome to Salon London. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'd very much like to thank our members and supporters from Salon London, Salon North, and also Festival. And I know we've got a lot of new people joining us tonight, and so a very warm welcome to you. To say a little bit about Salon London, we formed in 2008 with Helen Bagnall, Dick and Towns and myself to bring bold and brilliant ideas to live audiences, and we've been running online since the COVID-19 pandemic. The session will be in conversation between myself and Sir Bob Geldof for 30 minutes, and then we'll be taking audience questions, which you can add by the comments box next to the video. So to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Juliet Russell, and aside from Salon London and also Festival, I'm immersed in music. I'm a vocal coach, composer, and basically voice nerd and massive music fan. So to introduce our guest tonight, there's a lot that I could say about him and a lot that you probably think you already know. And I'm going to keep it very music focused. His latest book, Tales of Boomtown Glory, chronicles his lyrical output spanning over 6 decades. He burst onto the music scene in 1975 as frontman and songwriter with the Boomtown Rats, who formed in 1975 in Dun Laoghaire, Dublin. Influenced by the emerging punk scene, but also by blues and rock and roll, the group was a breath of fresh air in the traditional and staid Irish music scene of the time. The Rats became the voice of Ireland's disaffected youth. After moving to the UK in 1976, they quickly had chart success in 1977 with their first chart hit, Looking After Number One. This was quickly followed by more chart success, leading to, in 1979, their first number one hit with Rat Trap. They were the first Irish band to reach number one in the UK. The band released 5 albums in 8 years before finally disbanding in 1986, before reforming again in 2013 and releasing Citizens of Boomtown in 2020, their album alongside a brilliant BBC documentary of the same name. Profoundly moved by news reports by Michael Burke on the BBC News in 1984 of the devastating Ethiopian famine, Geldof was motivated to respond, joining forces with Midure to write and coordinate Band Aid, achieving the number one single, Do They Know It's Christmas Time, and raising money in response to this humanitarian crisis. This in turn led to the huge collaborative fundraiser Live Aid in 1985. Geldof has formed 2 production companies, is an author, a writer, including for The Guardian, The Economist, The Financial Times, and he's also been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He has released a total of 12 albums, not including compilations, including 5 solo albums, and has been performing live for more than 5 decades. Within the pages of Tales of Boomtown Glory lies a lifetime love affair with words and with music. A collective of 189 lyrics, there is beauty, frustration, energy, love, humour, sadness, hope, and poetry within these words. Of course, they were never meant to be read without music and never meant to be heard without music. And when you're reading it, you do feel like you're reading someone's diary and doing something that maybe you shouldn't be, but it's really enjoyable all the same. And these words encourage you to travel with them. Here to talk about his creative life, his music, and his way with words, please give a huge, warm welcome to Sir Bob Geldof. Hello, Sir Bob.
Hi.
Hello, it's lovely to have you with us. One of the parts I loved about the book was that it's not chronological, that it's alphabetical, and it makes you, I think, treat the words as they come, and I really appreciate that about it. But I particularly loved at the beginning, your introduction, you really talk about the creative process and that really birthing a song and how you might write these amazing words and then suddenly they're really clunky and you can't sing them, and you might have a concept which feels perfect, but you can't deliver it. And I'd just like you to talk a little bit about your creative process and wonder how much that might have changed over the years.
When I was a kid, I'd read about, the geniuses of rock and roll and how they'd arrive at spontaneity and, the words would just come. And I suppose thinking about it, that happens anyway, pre the recording process. It comes. I'm not sure you ever set out with an idea that I want to say this song. I'm bashing away at the guitar, and I use the term advisedly because I'm not very good at that. But the sense and the urgency or lack thereof of which I'm playing suggests something something in the subconscious, somewhere sort of in the sump of thought, throws an image or a line at you, and or someone says, or something you read, and you write it down rapidly, and it's rather like a loose thread on an old jumper. Should you pull it, it will gradually unravel, and you need to grab that line or that thought and tug at it, and it'll unravel in front of you. And it may start off being something and end up being something completely different. And the best at this point in my life is when I'm not sure at all what it's about. It's completely not empirical. And the reason for that is that I'm listening to something when the taping is done that is unknown to me but true. Some part of me has said something in such a way that the sound and the noise suggests something that I should have understood long before, and I may not even understand that which has been recorded until a couple of years down the trail on a stage one night in another town. It'll be blindingly obvious to me what I was on about. But nonetheless, the song works in its finality. And the finality is always when another pair of ears hear it, rather like a painting. Really is only finished when a pair of eyes have viewed it and understand completely what the guy painting it or the woman painting it has meant. So that sounds over mysterious. I'm not someone who can get up and say, now I'm going to write a song today. It doesn't work like that. But they will come. And I've been through fallow periods like everyone else where I've panicked and, you know, I've had 6 cups of coffees to get me going or stayed up purposely all night, because at that fuzzy nexus of the foreconscious and the subconscious banging up against each other, and there doesn't appear to be any barrier, when you're woozy with sleep or your mind is just going off on itself, then things begin to happen. But that really is not that often. And then to your point earlier, I'd have written words that are contextualized, and sometimes you think you've got a killer line. And you hand the microphone and the backing track, that which the music that the band has recorded, starts, and you sing the words, and it's just clunky. And there are earlier records where, you know, if you gave me names, I'd say, no, that one didn't work for me because it didn't sit. I was jamming it into the rhythm and the beat and the scansion. And it's an okay vocal and the words are okay, but it's not really what I meant. And so nowadays, if it gets clunky, I'll try it a couple of times and I'd say, no, let's scrap it. And I just stand at the mic and close my eyes and see what happens. And more often than not, nothing. It's pretty crap. But certainly out of it will come a line or two that makes the whole thing that I worked on in the orthodox manner, it suddenly comes together, or a completely new. There's a new single brought out last Friday. I heard it on the radio today. It sounded really good, and I was just playing a very, very simple thing which I liked. I didn't want to go off into anything. It was 2 chords. I just thought, I like this. I'll just stay on it and see what happens. And I just sang into the mic up in Pete's place, Pete, the bass player, and the Rats, and sort of the MD, the musical director guy. And and he said, well, you know, what are you going to sing? And I said, well, I'll just sing something. And I sang quite literally what I heard on the radio today, just once.
Yeah.
And I tried to redirect it. I tried to restructure it, but both Simon, the drummer, and Pete said, just leave it as it is. It's fine. And it was just me walking into the park on a summer's day. And that was it. That's the song. And it has the sense of that. It has there are words in there that make me walk through the park in my head, so it works.
Yeah, and that's actually there's so many rich things to pull from that actually, and one of them, there's two. I think that having trust in collaboration. I think nearly every art form is a collaboration, and having those trusted people that we take things to, that they say. There's a lot about trust there actually, because you're going up to the mic and trusting that what comes out will be what's needed, or if it's not, then you can change it, and also that the songwriting will come, the creativity will come. But there's something I want to pick up on what you said. You said a beautiful image about pulling a thread from a jumper. And there's a line that I love in the book, which is where you talk about having a not so wonderful time in your childhood. And there's a golden thread that comes through the purple radiogram. And that's the influence of music. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that golden thread that influenced you as a young person.
If you saw the film about the band a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
Under Alan Yentop's aegis, under the Imagine slot. It was interesting to me because two things were very clear to me. One, that the propellant of the band was, the animus was rage. And as I say in the film, it still is, I think. And the second thing was, which I hadn't understood, that none of us had a family. We weren't brought up in sort of normal family structure. And that was because both of them went to boarding school. Jerry, the guitar player who left on the fourth album, I had no idea that he came from a brutally dysfunctional family. No idea whatsoever. He was placid. He played folk blues, which is a lovely kind of music, non-aggressive really. And I guess being young guys and that we weren't very interested in each other's personal lives and certainly weren't going to talk about them. They were kind of irrelevant when you were trying to take on the world sort of thing. But it became clear that in my case, my mum died when I was young, about 7 or 8, just suddenly had a stroke and died at 40. My dad, the only job he could get was selling towels around the countryside of rural Ireland in the 50s and 60s. And he'd go away on Monday and come back on Friday. I had an eldest sister who, quite rightly, had no desire to become a surrogate mum at 17. So she went off and married the local cop, nice guy. And my middle sister was the family SWAT. And she stayed in school until about 8 at night. The nuns gave her tea and then she came home. So I'd come back from school and sort of take care of myself. But it was crap. I wasn't really aware. There was no self-pity. It was just not fun. And, it was November in Ireland, cold, dark, going back to this old Victorian house. We let out any spare capacity there was in the house in bed sits to try and get any money. But other than that, I didn't really see anyone. So, I'd take care of myself. And you learn organization and you learn independence when you don't have a choice. But you also tend to become very dogmatic because there's no one to temper your rapidly growing opinions and arguments. There was no TV, there was no fridge, no phone, no nothing like that. So what I did have was the radio and no one to make me do any homework. So I've failed every single exam ever, Christmas, summer, 11 plus, O level, A level. They're called different things in Ireland, but, because of that. And I would just read. There was nothing else to do. And so I just took the books out the school library, the local library. And I couldn't be arsed making the fire every night, going to the basement, getting coal, waiting for the room to heat up, getting more coal. So I just put on the gas oven and put my feet into the oven in the kitchen and just sit back in a kitchen chair and read. But into that, I was Radio Luxembourg, the one rock and roll station from the improbable microstate of Luxembourg. And I was at the cusp age. It was 1963, and I was sort of 10 or something. And through that radio came the voices of these young boys and girls. And they talked of other plausibilities, other possibilities, other universes of change. And for me, you know, I was in a sort of permanent panic, really. And sort of, as I say, out of the sort of purple rock and roll ether came this golden thread, you know, which I clung on to feverishly and frankly still do. You know, in my life, and I suppose possibly in yours and some of the people tuned into this, rock and roll was the medium whereby we interpreted the world. It's where we got all our ideas of change, social, cultural, economic, political. That's gone. It was turned out to be a 50-year pop. But suddenly this rapidly forming consciousness based on an awareness that things were crap, and the books I were reading were to do with really, I suppose, the romance of poverty. You know, Steinbeck, Dickens, Studs Terkel, Woody Guthrie, except there is no romance in poverty. It's shit. It's really awful, you know. And I was kind of painfully aware, though we were lower middle class, which made it even more pathetic, sort of clinging on to the precipice of, you know, politesse and, you know, keeping our end up. That was, my dad was spending every penny he could on a decent education for his daughters and son. So that's what was going on. And, you know, here was Mick and Keith proselytizing, talking about earlier music that I should listen to: Muddy Waters, Howling Wolf, Lightning Hopkins, Howling Wolf, Muddy Waters. I mean, you know, were these men or forces of nature? Actually, both. Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan talking about Woody Guthrie. And, you know, the Beatles with their cheeky lack of deference, you know, like, you know, just, which suited me perfectly. The Rolling Stones with their contemptuous insolence. Bob Dylan saying, it's this way, guys, you know, let's go. That was it. Pete Townsend smashing everything to bits. Yes, absolutely. All of those things, you know, I was just the right age at the right time, in the right conditions, married to what I was reading. And so that was the one thing that gave possibility and hope. And so really thinking about it, you know, the stuff I've done prior to the band was all around that. Really, at 13, Woody Guthrie was, Bob Dylan was reading James Baldwin. I read James Baldwin. James Baldwin had read Alan Patton's Cry the Beloved Country, so I read that. And at 13, then with my mate Mick Foley, we started anti-apartheid in school and organised a march. I thought like maybe 50 people from the class would show up. 1,000 showed up. And then at 15, 16, I just didn't go home anymore. What was the point? I just took the bus into Dublin. And there was a crowd there called the Simon Community. I don't know how I banged into them, but they would gather up all the unsold groceries from the grocery shop, unsold vegetables from the grocery shops at 6 at night when they closed. And the first round of bread from the bakeries would be at 11, and they'd give us the first round, and we'd make a fire in Smithfield Market and make soup. And around the fire would gather all these sort of lost men, divorce being illegal in Ireland up until recently. The schizophrenic ladies and men, bag ladies, bag men, the way-faced, pinched streetwalkers, who were not glamorous women of Hollywood legend, but impoverished little things, skinny as anything. And their pimps beating them up in front of me with baseball bats. But I was just too scared and too weedy to be able to do anything. I still feel guilty about that. And so here were all these people I'd read about in those books, but I didn't need to go to Monterey with Steinbeck or Oklahoma in the Depression with Woody Guthrie or Studs Terkel's people in Chicago or Dickens's people in London. They were there all around me. And everything resolved itself in the music I was listening to. Really everything. Like here was, Dead End Street, The Kinks, all these sort of songs resonated with me. So that was it. That was the one thing that pulled me out and got me through things. And everything in music suggested the inevitability of change, the desirability of change, the possibility of change, and the rhetoric of change will be rock and roll itself, and the platform for change would be rock and roll. So when you get to 1975 and the zero economy of Ireland, which offered its young people nothing as usual, and when there's a civil war on the island, which was called euphemistically the Troubles, as if it was a minor bout of political flu. In fact, it was 3,600 people murdered. When you had a government utterly corrupt, tacit at least in what was happening in the north, overt often, when you had a church silent at the murders, but busily abusing the children of its parishioners, and you had the money men on the side making money from all of it on the QT, and this dreadful silence that enveloped us all. We all knew and we all shut up. All of us, we were all complicit in this culture of claustrophobia, this national suffocation. And enough, really enough, I'd had it. And simultaneously, of course, in London, you had 27% inflation. So that generation that came into the economy were denied any chances. Johnny Rotten, that other Irish boy, said, there is no future in England's dreaming, brilliantly enough. So, of course, you get the Clash and you get the Sex Pistols in London. New York was bankrupt in the same year. And the President of America said, drop dead New York City when they asked for help. No police were answering calls, no firemen. You couldn't drive in the roads, the potholes. So, of course, you get the Ramones, and Patti Smith and Blondie and Talking Heads. In Ireland, you get the Boomtown Rats. And with our personal backgrounds, as I've described, no families, no job. 4 of them were in architectural school. But what was the point? Pete, who I've mentioned, the bass player in the solo band and the Rats, he got a job in Iran, but, binned it because we started the band. But other than that, that was it. So all of those factors. Prior to that, I'd been working on an underground paper in Canada when the underground papers were deeply political, but I had 50% of the paper to write music about. And the music that interested me was not disco or hair rock that was happening. It was what David Bowie and Velvet Underground and Roxy Music were doing. Things that suggested new difference, So all of that is why, really, I mean, it's all retrospective. It seems to make sense of your life, but at the time you're doing it, you're just afraid and fumbling through and working to instinct.
There's so much to pick up in there. There's a few things I just want to kind of sort of note, things that I noticed in the books that were quite thematic that you said there. One of which is that rock and roll is an avatar for change, that pop music is for change. And I know that, I still think that that's the case. I know there's more, you said that was the social media at the time. It's how people got their messages out. But I still think things like hip hop and grime and even Beyonce's Freedom, those songs are still carrying the currency of change. And I still think music is part of that currency of change. And I think there's so many things as well, like with Ireland, now it's unrecognizable from the Ireland you describe at that time, and that rage and the unemployment and the no future. It feels like Ireland's kind of, now that abortion is no longer illegal, legalised gay marriage. It feels like Ireland's a different place now. And also there's, when you talk about the influences, I think you very much hear the Bowie, the Roxy music in your vocal. But the other thing that really struck me was how much of the blues I hear in your vocal, which I hadn't appreciated before. The sort of the John Lee Hooker kind of, I don't know, the jumps into kind of head voice of Howling Wolf and the grit, and they're just kind of getting it out there. Yet that kind of clarity as you go higher, and also the angular nature of the guitar playing of the early Rat stuff, and just that kind of a motif that's called back and a motif that's called back, and that kind of influence of music I hadn't appreciated. Obviously, we know that blues led to rock and roll, but I hadn't appreciated its presence so strongly in that kind of punk and rage, which is really beautiful. And it's something that really made me listen to it musically in a different way. There's something.
Well,
No, go.
I don't agree with you that music still really has anything to do with change. In fact, it's to do with stability. I think, as I said, that the social media of our time was rock and roll. Mm-hmm. It became the lingua franca of the planet. Because of all the things it suggested, the notions attributed to it of freedom, etc., etc., etc. But that sort of ended in the year 2000. If we want to be smart and neat, we can go to 2006. Let's say it starts in 56 with Elvis and Little Richard and the others and goes through to 2000, because at that point, you get actual social media, you get online. 2004, Google thinks it could do something with all that digital exhaust, the afterthought of our searches, and they wrap it up in this thing called data, and they start making serious money. I think from that point on, music goes back to what it was in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Fabulous artists, great songs, but it's a background to your life. You'll always have the song that you remember when you did this, but it's not a guide. It's not an instructive manual. It can articulate change, but it's meaningless because you're getting your notions of change through something else. So the central spine of the culture in my life, in the bulk of my life, was pop music, the central spine of the culture. Most things, movies, TV, literature, revolved around the notion of rock and roll. We say it as an expression, very rock and roll. You know, whether it was philosophers or, you know, it was to do with lots of things attributed to rock and roll. Obviously, technology is to do with it. That's the first point I'd argue with you about. The second point is that where we needed to find a base music that we could all agree on. I mean, you know, it took about 2 rehearsals. He wanted to do that, and the other guy wanted to just do this one, and the other wanted to do this. When we found the name The Boomtown Rats in Woody Guthrie's biography, Bound for Glory, and that's why I called the book Tales of Boomtown Glory. Mm-hmm. Woody Guthrie was living, I think, in Oklahoma with his family. He was 11 years old. And they discover oil. And there were these itinerant oil men who wandered around from town to town where they found the oil, the boom towns. And they were called boom chasers. And they came to town with their families, and the families had kids, and the new kids, of course, wanted to join up with the older kids in town, in the old gangs and that. And Woody's gang wouldn't allow the new kids to join. So with the ripe social conscious of 11, Woody goes off to start his own gang with the new kids. And of course, the leader of the old gang comes to Woody and says, so do you want a war then? Is that it? And Woody says, yeah, if it has to be. And the leader says, you boomtown rats, you. And of course, I literally was rereading that the night before our first gig. And I passed it by when I was 16 or something. But suddenly it just was glaringly obvious. We had another name, but I thought, no, we got to change the name. This is what it's meant to be. And once we had the name, bizarrely, the Rats ceased to be, this was our first gig, so we were just going to play music, you know, and be entertained and entertain people. But now it had clear intent and purpose. Now it could be potentially an instrument of change, which in Ireland's case, it sort of turned out to be without being too grandiose. But if you see the other artists from different generations in the film, that's what they'll say. You know, Bono talks about the glorious racket of the Rats. It was a revolution. It was this, that, and the other. Sinead O'Connor, you know, when I got on TV, I thought it would be the first and only time. So the last thing I actually talked about was music. It's what I described earlier about the state of the country. Where I agree with you is that there has been an extraordinary and elegant social revolution in the last 12 years, where referendum after referendum, the church state, that poisonous nexus of the church state compact that was the Constitution, was one by one thrown aside with proper debate, with elegance, with determination, and with great intellectual rigor. I was in Limerick a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe, when the last one, the abortion referendum, the you know, gay rights, gay marriage, all that stuff had happened. And now the final one was the referendum on abortion, which is deeply emotional for many people. You've got to be extremely sensitive about people's views about it because they're real and they are to be discussed. And on the street in Limerick were two stalls, one pro, one anti, side by side, giving out their leaflets and, you know, trying to engage you in the argument. But there they were, you know, sharing their coffees, going to the Dunkin' Donuts and get donuts for each other and stuff like that. It was, you know, it sounds kind of Disney-ish, but it was excellent. And, you know, the country that we argued for that first time on television, which was the major show of the country, the Late Late Show, that came into being. We had to leave. I couldn't stand it anymore. And we had to leave. And, you know, we arrive in the middle of this cultural revolution, 1976 in London. And it was like, you know, we're free. But what we'd argued about and what that younger generation were glued to on TV, Bono, Sinead, Shane MacGowan, all these other people, is what happened, you know. And I'm thrilled for that. It's great to go back to Ireland and feel deeply comfortable, because it wasn't comfortable at all when I was growing up.
Yeah, and you kind of cast a beautiful image about people working together for change, even if they're holding different views. And there's a thing that it was interesting to talk about Sinead O'Connor, because I want to talk to you, because one of my favourite points in Citizens of Boomtown is when she talks about how much you influenced her as a singer, and she says that you definitely were a huge influence on her, not because she went to sing like you, but she loved your honesty and your emotional presence in your singing and the freedom that you had. And she says, you know, she talks about your voice being just so free, and she says it's like a fucking bird flying all over the place. And I just wondered about your relationship with your voice, because I've never heard you talk about it. And I wondered, yeah, what is it that you feel you can express through it that maybe speaking can't? What your relationship is with it?
I hate my voice. I can't sing. It's very sweet of Sinead, but the truth is, nah. You know, it's sort of what's happening in music today. It's all, you know, wonderful voices. It's all talent, ability, craft. And as I've never had any of those, I just, you know, rely on attitude. That'll do. And, you know, I really hate it. I'm so disappointed when I listen back to a track, you know, it's not what's in my head. There's a bit that was cut out of the film where Dave Stewart says, what's it, you know, that I write very complex songs that Freddie Mercury could sing, you know, but Bob can't, you know, and, you know,
Thanks,
he's
Dave.
absolutely right. And I think I can, because I hear it in my head, And then I'm doing it and I'm going, for fuck's sake. So what Sinead is hearing is me busking, trying to get to that Freddie Mercury pitch. And I'm never going to. So, yeah. And as I've got older and, I can sort of essay a sort of probably faux seriousness with a deeper voice. I don't know. I hate it. And I will never listen to myself on radio. I will never listen. Indeed, I won't listen or watch or read anything about myself ever. I just can't stand it. Such a fucking idiot. I just go, the things I say are so stupid. Stop. Why do you do it? So that's my relationship with my voice.
Okay.
I fucking hate.
I love that contradiction, being out there doing it but still having that relationship with it. It's fantastic. But I love, there's quite a few bits in the book that really made me laugh, and one of them was when you were saying about the jazzers at the college and they were all going, oh, Boomtown Rats, they're rubbish, hopeless, they can only got 3 chords. You're like, yeah, but what chords they were, which I love. But also I think that the Boomtown Rats had incredibly sophisticated songs for their time. Like when you look at something like Rat Trap, the structure of that song, and obviously there's a famous moment where you rip up Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta's pictures, but the structure of that song is really something else. And when you think that, if people learn songwriting, the craft of it, they think, verse, pre-chorus, middle, but that's so complex. It's got this sort of verse that's kind of really conversational, then a bit of a different verse, pre-chorus, chorus, kind of another verse, obviously the sax intro, which is amazing, the bass intro, then you've got another verse that's a bit different again, then you got the whole Billy Take a Walk, which is different again, then you got another bit of the chorus, then you got the outro. I mean, it's incredibly complex, and it's definitely more than 3 chords.
Yeah, but it was the second record, Atomic for the Troops, and we come to the end, and Mutt Lange, who was the producer, who was a young tyro from South Africa, and he subsequently went on to be, basically owned the state of Maine and most of Switzerland. It became so successful. He did AC/DC's Back Black. He wrote a lot of the songs, wrote Shania Twain, eventually married her, divorced her, The Cars, Muse, Def Leppard, wrote nearly all their songs, it was huge. But he was our first guy, really. And the first record is essentially the rhythm and blues you were talking about, because once we had that, once we all understood that that's what we loved, was early 60s R&B, but we all knew John Lee Hooker and Howlin' Wolf because the Stones had referred us back to it. So that was easy enough. And that was launchpad music for us. And I could easily write around that the things I wanted to say. And the things I wanted to say were largely based on Van Morrison and Dr. Feelgood. Once Dr. Feelgood had again stripped away all the nonsense of rock and roll, that was Yes, and even the Rolling Stones had lost the plot. They were going on about their big country houses and their limousines, and what's that got to do with our lives? So along come Dr. Feelgood from Canvey Island. What? I mean, I have to say, in Dunleary, County Dublin, that sounded quite exotic to us, Canvey Island. But also, I tuned into lyrics straight away, and I heard this very aggressive, clear, basic music, wonderful. But the opening line, growled by Lee Brillo, was standing, watch the towers burning at the break of day. And I think that's beautiful. And I thought it was the social blocks, and the sun coming up on the social. No, of course, it's the oil flares on Canvey Island. It doesn't matter because that's even as romantic to me. In fact, as soon as we arrived in England, we made a pilgrimage to Canvey Island. That's how much the debt was. And we never went back, actually. But so they were writing about their immediate waking up in the morning, open your eyes, and there's the flares. Van Morrison was writing, of course, these street opera epics about the streets he lived in, Cypress Avenue, Madame George, all these sort of things. And a Stoneleigh, it's a fishing trip. A couple of guys at 11 or 12 going on a little fish. Wonderful. I mean, epic and beautiful and memorable. And so I thought I'll go for that sort of thing. And so that's why the rhythm and blues suited us, because that was the feel goods. I could write in a contemporary sense about the people around me. And when we got to the second album, the lesson that we'd learned in the first album with Mutt Lange of structuring pop, how to write pop songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew we could never compete with the absolute nihilistic brilliance of the Sex Pistols. You know, that band were unbelievable. Not live. I thought they were pretty crap live when I saw them. But just Steve and Paul were unbelievably good. I mean, still are. And Johnny was just a great lyricist, you know. And, you know, his mannerism, his voice, perfect. And we could never compete with the cool of the Clash. You know, they looked so great, and we were just doofuses off the boat, you know. So we had to go in another way if we were to survive. And, you know, and also I thought that this can only last a minute, this you know, burp of rage. And Elvis Costello, Graham Parker, Van Morrison, Graham Parker, it sounded like the same thing to me. So I thought, I want to go and write songs like that. They've got a greater sense to me. And so that was Tonic for the Troops. And we wanted to stay in the charts because that's how change happens. If you get to number one, then change happens because other musicians, what's this going on? Oh, I like that. I'll do that. I'll do that. You begin to influence things. And millions of people are listening to you. So most of the songs were always about something, except they were camouflaged in this sort of poppiness of this, you know. And I'd written Rat Trap when I worked in the abattoir in Dublin, again, the only job I could get. And I didn't know I was writing songs. I had no intention of being in a band, no ambition to be in a band. It really wasn't in my head at all. But I was just making notes. I don't know why, because I did that all the time, of the people around me. So this wasn't just an abattoir of animals. This was a slaughterhouse of human dreams. And everyone there was trapped as the cows getting that bolt through their head and their necks slashed. They were trapped. And I had to get out. I knew I was there for a limited period. I'd get some money, move on to the next country, the next job, whatever. But the people around me, there was a guy, little shit there called Paul. I call him Billy in the song because it scanned better. And I was just making notes, and they weren't in the full of the song. But come the end of A Tonic for the Troops, Mutt says to me, you know, have you got anything else? And I said, come on, man. You know, we've just spent whatever doing this, X many songs. He goes, no, but that song, the maypole around which all the other songs revolve, isn't there. It's not there. And he goes, you know, you're just going to get criticized for this sort of flighty pop music sort of thing. And he said, you must have something. And I said, I've got these words and I've always noodled around on 3 chords. He could play it to me. So I played G, D, E minor, down, down, down. And he said, okay, let's work on that. What's the opening line? And I said, are you serious? And he said, what's the opening line? I said, Billy doesn't like it living here in this town. The traps had been sprung long before he was born. He said, okay, great. He said, what happened to him? So I just précised all these notes and wrote the story of those people. And then I thought, well, I'll set the scene. I'll talk the scene. There was a lot of rocking going on that night. And I was thinking of Phil Lynott and Thin Lizzy and the Boys Are Back in Town, really, who's a direct descendant of Van Morrison as well in his sort of lyricism. We all are in Ireland, is the truth. And it wavers and goes all over the place because I wanted to say lines, and Mutt was doing this not because he was going, Bob, it doesn't fit. I said, well, no, but I got to fit this bit in because she comes in and, you know, she's in the cafe with him and he's drunk and like that. And he was going, for fuck's sake. And he goes, we got to get a chorus, you know, chorus schmorus, you know. And there really isn't a chorus in the song. And it was going to be the album song. So we go on the Kenny Everett video show, which people liked. And the director, David Mallet, said, I'd like you to do that album. So we said, great, because people were getting pissed off with us having endless hits, singles. So we did it thinking this is our bid for credibility. And as per an old-fashioned movie about rock and roll, literally loads of people went into, when there were record shops everywhere, they went in saying, that song the Boomtown Rats did, have you got it? Now, the album wasn't out. They said, no, they just did it on telly. Oh. So, of course, immediately the record company said, fucking hell. And we said, are you sure it's a single? They said, yeah, it's a single. Now, remember, Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta were number 1, 2, and 3. And I couldn't stand, well, none of us could stand it. So this thing enters the charts at number 9, our highest entry ever. We're going, this is so counterintuitive. This was the album song. This was to give us cred. And we're now at number 9. And then it leaps to number 3, knocking John and Olivia out of number 3. So I clip the charts and frame it because we're never, ever going to be higher than number 3. Fuck me, next week, number 2. Knocks Olivia and John at number 2. Next week, number 1. And it was amazing. And so we go on Top of the Pops as Sinead. Well, as taxi drivers remember 2 things about me. Fucking great when you tore up John Travolta, Bob. That's one. And you told Thatcher to fuck off. Somebody did at least. I didn't, but okay, and, so that's it. That's what my life is: tearing up John Travolta and telling Mrs. Thatcher. But so it gets to number 1, and it was a good one to get to number 1 with. So as you said, it was the first Irish one. It was also the first of the new wave number 1s. So yeah, I mean, it's a good song.
It's an epic song, and what you said about like an old-fashioned film and everything, the stars align. I feel like that song is like an old-fashioned film. It's like you see the scenes, and a lot of your songs have characters and scenes in them that you get a snapshot into people's lives, and I really appreciate that about the songwriting. And that one's so, I don't know. When I first heard it, I thought it was about an informer. And then obviously reading the story and knowing about, because I was probably, what age? Like 12 maybe when it came out. So yeah, it was the Billy Take a Walk and the Bullet in the Head, and I hadn't realised all about the abattoir, but I loved it. I thought it was just such an epic song. And for me, as growing up at that time, for me, I Don't Like Mondays and that song were just like sort of genre defining, and just there wasn't anything else like those songs.
Well, I think it did what... And I'd love to say it was intentional. It wasn't. It was just me stuck in this slaughterhouse with these people who were stuck. Mm-hmm. And I think it did for me what those songs I described to you as 64, 5, 6 did for me. It said that you could get out. It described the conditions accurately. And, I mean, these were real people. Her name is real. She was on the case. She was much smarter than him. She knew he was a loser. I mean, I'm not sure it does offer hope, really. It's a rat trap and you've been caught, but I still think that I didn't anticipate it, but in 1978, there were probably a lot of people in their teens who just thought this is going nowhere, like most of us thought. I mean, you've got to remember, why rock and roll today doesn't exist within its own social political context, but it did in 1956, it did in 1963, 66, it did in 1976. You cannot remove the iconography or the sound of punk from the last years of the Callahan regime. You can't do that because it had ceased to govern with any credibility. The economy was running into a brick wall rapidly. As we famously, the rubbish was piling up in Leicester Square. The graves weren't being dug, etc., etc. So everyone was standing by. Everyone was anticipating. There really had to. Things had to change. Just no one expected it to come from the right. No one expected it to be a woman. No one expected her to have a handbag with which she swiped at every institution, the monarchy, her own party, the squirearchy, the opposition, the trade unions, whatever. You know, as I've said, in many ways, Margaret Thatcher was just Johnny Rotten in drag.
I'll leave that thought there. I think I've got so many more questions to ask you, but I'm going to open it up to audience questions just for time. But thank you. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. And there's so much more I could ask, but let's see if our audience has things that they want to ask you. I'm sure they will. Also, so Bob, when you're moving around, sometimes we lose your sound when the iPad's moving.
You too.
No questions as yet. Are there? Oh. It's visible only to you in the host, but I can't. Sorry about this. I have to come round. I'm so sorry. I might need a bit of tech support with that. I'm going to move out the way so we do a session. Excuse me, everyone, just because I can't see the questions right now. Thank you. I'm just getting them passed to me. Can you unplug it so I can get it? No? Okay. Thank you. Oh, gosh. Ticking, gone off. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'll use my glasses. Sorry, everyone, for that. Oh. Okay. Okay, so we've got a conversation from Kevin Rowlands, a question from Kevin Rowlands, and he's saying, in Banana Republic really influenced him as a song. And have you got anything to say about...
Can't hear you.
So you can't hear me?
No.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yeah. So we've got the first question is from Kevin Rowlands, and he says, Banana Republic got him into the Rats 40 years ago. And he said that Europe Looked Ugly is so underrated. And do you have that song, Europe Looked Ugly, do you have anything to say about that now?
Europe Looked Ugly?
Europe Looked Ugly, yeah. So Banana Republic got him into the Rats, but he also thinks that Europe Looked Ugly was very underrated.
I think I write about Europe Looked Ugly in the Tales of Boomtown Glory book.
You do. You do.
I never rated it really. I don't think we got it. That's the truth. And I remember when I saw it recently in some scrappy notebook where I was writing it. I was definitely writing it in a cold winter tour, trawling through Europe, which did seem very tired and had lost any notion of itself. And it was still the communist period. So that the wall hadn't come down, anything like that at that point. And I was feeling middle of a tour, coat on in the bus or a train, scarf, sore throat from singing the night before, not able to speak in case I lose weather. So all these factors come into it. And staring out at some, snow that's melting and exposed rock and stuff like that, and condensation on the bus window. So it reminds me of that. So where I agree with you, Kevin, is that it's popped into my head a lot to describe things to myself, especially recently with Brexit or pre-Brexit and stuff like that. I don't really like the chorus. I didn't think it worked at the time, but looking at it now, I think, where I say, what will we do now? I mean, I didn't know what that, to my point earlier in this conversation, I didn't know what I was saying that far then, but I kind of do now. It kind of does fit. But it deserved to be a B-side, really. It was never anything more than that. And I'm not sure if we ever did it live. We possibly did. It was, coming into the 80s, 81 maybe, 80, 81. And so, we were messing with that electronic sound as well as everybody else. Will I put it on myself? Well, I don't put any records of ours on, but, if it came up, on something, would I like to hear it? I'd be listening to the words and thinking, yeah, that's good, that works. Especially the first verses. I think that works pretty well. In fact, I think the second verse goes on saying, "I'm waiting for the train," doesn't it? Yeah, and there's a good metaphor in that about the train track disappearing behind you like a steel slug on a slime or something. I like that. That worked, yeah. But thank you anyway. That's a nice compliment. It's a song I'd forgotten, but now and again pops into my head. Do I think it was underrated? No.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Kevin. And we have a question from Fiona. Hello, Fiona, who's asking, were you influenced by any of the Irish poets?
The great influence, the singular Irish genius is Van. And the reason why is because, well, one, he opened up a whole avenue of pop that many people walk down. I mean, Springsteen, of course, Jackson Browne. If you ask them, they immediately say, like Springsteen has always said, it's, Van Morrison, it's a sort of deathless mix of soul and imagery and language. And, why Van is because he comes from a lager culture, like a ghetto culture of unionism. So, here's this separate culture. It doesn't exist anywhere in the British Isles, except up in that narrow confines of their own space. And it's very like the Boers in South Africa. They cling on to that because if it goes, then they sort of go. And but luckily for Van, his dad worked in the shipyards, but the shipyards were a sort of, the problem was that if you were Catholic, you couldn't work in the shipyards. There was, it was essentially an apartheid system. But his father had always listened to jazz and blues, so Van grew up with that. Plus his mother was Jehovah's Witness, so he went to the Kingdom Hall and heard that. So he was brought up with this, proxy American Southern culture almost, or music. But he had a wide enough curiosity and intellect to understand there was a greater Celtic hinterland of culture out there. And when he was a kid, he played with show bands, which were dreadful concoctions of music in Ireland, but he got out quick. But he was with it enough to pick up all these things. And then reading the Beats and Yeats, he developed his own language, this intuitive language of talking about things. He married that to this wonderful mix of the blues and a deep soul of some Celtic resonance in there, and almost a Yeatsian language. And that's why it's so really powerful. Sometimes its simplicity is breathtaking, like the blues, but its imagery is just simple, and yet evokes whole mad images. So he really is a top-line songwriter, top of the pile, up there with, the people you would associate him with, say a Dylan or a Neil Young or something like that. And so he's, of course, influenced the whole line of Irish musicians. So if Van deals in a sort of Celtic mysticism, then Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy really engaged in a sort of Celtic romanticism. And by that I mean that, Philip was the only black person that, I'd ever seen in Ireland. That's the truth, But, he wasn't that black. But he made a big thing about it because secretly he wanted to be Jimi Hendrix, So Philip would write using these tropes from Irish Celtic tradition, sort of like Roisin Dubh. The Irish were forbidden from saying the name Éire, Ireland. They were forbidden by law, by the British. So they dreamt up avatars. So Kathleen Ní Houlihan was Kathleen, the daughter of Houlihan. That was Ireland. Black Rosaleen, Roisin Dubh, that was Ireland. So, Philip had all his album sleeves done with Celtic imagery, romantic imagery, and these romantic characters. That was Phil. Rory Gallagher just opted out completely and imagined that he wasn't on the River Lee in Cork. He was, in fact, on the Mississippi in Clarksdale, you know. But again, there's a purity. There is a difference to Rory's blues playing. It's the Celtic blues. The Rats wanted nothing to do with Celtic at all. I wanted to be as urban as possible. I wanted to be in the 20th century. I didn't want to refer to any hinterland for the only hinterland I had was pop. And so that was it. It was just pure urban. And that's because I don't have a nationalistic bone in my body, I think, and I'm glad about that. It's a poison, and but I never got bitten by that poison. So you don't hear that much in our songs. Banana Republic will be a complete rebuttal of that whole idea.
Thank you. That's such a rich answer. Thank you so much. We've got quite a few questions on songwriting, which is really interesting, from Eddie, from Joanne, and from Derek. And the questions, I'm going to put them together and you can answer them how you feel. Derek's question is, when you're writing lyrics now, how do you know if they're for your solo stuff or for the Boomtown Rats? And Joanne's is, what's the most positive moment that has resulted in lyrics for a song? Which most positive moment in your life?
I can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one question is, if you were to write new lyrics now, when you're writing lyrics now, how do you know if a song is for you as a solo artist or for the Rats? Joanne's question is, what's the most positive moment in your life that has sort of delivered a song for you or delivered lyrics from you? There's also someone wants to know whether there's lots of unreleased lyrics in the book, and are there any plans to release any of those songs? And the last one is, do you write lyrics separately to the music, or do they come together, or is there a particular way around that you prefer to work?
Okay. The one about the Rats v. Bob, when we regrouped, the one caveat I had was that I couldn't do nostalgia. I really couldn't. And I said I'd give it a go. I wasn't thrilled about giving it a go. But I suppose because the solo stuff, I really love doing it. And I love touring with that band. It's a very organic band. It's more like a Van Morrison band or a Willie Nelson band. It's just fabulous musicians. And I loved playing, 2,000 people. Great. And I just wander on and do these songs. But the Rats is, I have to be a pop star, like a superannuated pop star, but I have to do that thing. But it's not as if I try, but I thought, I'll have to try and be that again. I don't want to. And these songs, they're kind of rooted in their time. But next door to this room where I'm speaking, we set up. It was curiosity. It was an obligation to the guys to give it a try because they wanted to. And there was the vanity because we've been offered the Isle of Wight Festival, which was like, whereas it's fun playing to a couple of thousand people, I wanted to play to 100,000 again, see, get that vibe again going, that's fun. And when they started, I know this is like a cliche, but please believe me, when that group of individuals started playing, it thrilled me. Seriously, properly thrilled me. I went, what? That sounds so powerful, so raw. I'd no idea. Well, you don't. Because, you get together in somebody's lame basement and off you go and you think, okay, that'll do. And then you develop. It's just constant. You've no perspective on yourself whatsoever. And, but suddenly after so many years, I hear this group. Now, if one of you listening or watching joined the Rats tomorrow, it would obviously still be the Rats, but it would be, slightly altered because you'd be in it. But with this group of individuals, it makes a sound. What Bono on the film said, the glorious racket of the Boomtown Rats. And it was exactly what I wanted to hear. Again. And when I started singing those songs, if you've seen the documentary, I'm repeating myself, but they had a relevance that was if I did Rat Trap, it was with the same rage If I did Banana Republic, it was no longer about Ireland, as you've heard me explain, but now it's about Trump's America. If I did Mondays, it was not about an event in 1979, it was about last week's massacre. All those things, especially live, I'm completely lost in that sense. You know, I'm not thinking about this is about last week. I'm thinking it's the feeling it evokes. And similarly, when they start playing, I'm the front man. I'm not there with my guitar talking or whatever like I am with the solo band. I'm the front man, and that music makes me jump around like a fucking idiot, frankly, you know. But I'm not really aware I'm doing it. It's only afterwards when I look at film, I go, oh, for fuck's sake, you know, you can't dance. What are you doing, you know? But I'm not trying to dance. I'm just moving. And it's exciting. It really is. It's pathetic. It really excites me. I love that band. So they were saying, well, you know, we should do some more tracks. I go, why? Nobody's in. Who cares about the new Rolling Stones album? Come on, Mick. Honky Tonk Woman. You know, we're not doing that tonight. What do you mean? No, we're doing 3-4 tracks from our new album. Fuck off. Where's Satisfaction? Where's Brown Sugar? You know, play them. Give me Shelter, you know. So I thought, you know, nah, you know, I like doing I Never Loved David Brown. I like doing those. They work for me still, you know. So they were going, well, you know, we should try. So, you know, in order to write for the Rats, I discovered, having done a couple of gigs afresh, that the guy who does leap around like a shambolic ape, the guy who can say and do whatever he feels like on stage and not give a fuck, then or the consequences thereof, he's sort of different to the guy lounging on his sofa with a stupid Kenny Rogers beard talking to you now. He's Bobby Boomtown, and it is a different thing. I'll talk like this to you just on the side of the stage before we go on. Bang. As soon as you're out there, this other thing happens. It's not as if you know, shape shift or whatever it's called, but it definitely is an otherness. It really is. And it's extremely liberating. So how do I get back to him? Whereas before it was unconscious, I was in the Rats every day. How do I find that character and write like he'd write? So I wrote the song The Boomtown Rats, exactly that. So I wrote myself back to Bobby. Like I wrote, I'm going to Boomtown, I'm going back to Boomtown, because that's where I'm at. And when I get to Boomtown, I'll ask those cats what's happening here in Boomtown. It's those rats, the filthy rats, the Boomtown Rats. And then I invite everybody back in. Do you want to come to Boomtown? Meet you around the back between the dirty alleys and those Boomtown flats. They're dedicated to Saint Boomtown. He's the patron saint of crap. He's praying for a miracle, but what he gets is those rats. And I was laughing, and it was very easy. And the other thing why I was laughing was because in my head, I wanted 100,000 people after 34 years or whatever to be shouting the Boomtown Rats. So the chorus is the Boomtown Rats. It's so crap. And but in my head was an image of Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston with his fist like that. Ali is Liston is on the floor, and he's groggy, and Ali is standing over him. His face is livid with rage, and he's shouting, "What's my name? What's my name?" at Liston, humiliating him. You know, wanting him to say Muhammad Ali, because Liston refused to call him Muhammad Ali. He kept calling him Cassius Clay. And Ali standing up saying, "What's my name?" So I just, like, when we went out on stage at the Isle of Wight, Gary and Simon were shitting themselves. And Pete and I had just flown in from Germany with the solo band. And we'd been playing 3 stadiums with 80,000 people, not for us, but with our friends, German band called Totenhausen, who are huge. We were support. So we were match fit. We were ready for a big crowd. And my mate has a helicopter. And I said, give us a lift down. I'll give you 4 tickets. And he said, okay. So we flew in Rockstar. And we got out, and I got a snakeskin suit made. It pretends, because I needed to be Bobby Boomtown. I couldn't wear my fucking normal Bob Geldof outfit. So Bobby Boomtown put on his fake snakeskin suit. And he was fucking ready to go. But Gary and Simon are really crapping themselves like this at the side of the stage. And I said to the MC, are you going to introduce us? And he goes, yeah, if you want me to. And I said, well, what are you going to say? He said, you know, ladies and gentlemen, the Boomtown Rats. Ladies and give me that fucking thing. So I grabbed the mic and I go, are you fucking ready? Hey, the greatest rock and roll band in the world. And Gary and Simon look at me, they go, what? And I go, from Dunleary. And they start pissing themselves laughing. And we just walked out on stage. And the track was going, the Boomtown Rats. And as we walked out, there was 100,000 people going, the Boomtown Rats. And it was perfect and fun, which we were. And Bobby Boomtown was in the house and he wasn't leaving. So that's how the other stuff came. I think we had, anyway, 35 songs. I think Pete's got about 22, more or less finished on his computers. And, you know, some of the R&B ones, like She Said No, straight out the rule book 1976, you know, straight out. Ones that may sound more like Bob Geldof are Passing Through, and this single, Here's a Postcard, because they're too much sort of me. I can't really remember something. Yeah, I mean, but I do know. It's an interesting question, so thanks. I do know when it's me. I mean, I've got a couple of songs, you know, most never see the light of day, but there's some I'm doing at the moment that I just know are for me. You know, the Rats could play them, but it's not going to work doing that. You know, it requires something else for the Rats, which is also absolutely a vital part of me. And I'm glad that it's able to come out. So that's 2 questions. What were the other ones?
I think we've only got a couple of minutes, but they were, what's the song you've written that's come from the most positive experience of your life, the lyrics? And the other one was, do you tend to write lyrics first or music, or do they come together?
I what?
Do you write lyrics and music together, or do the lyrics come first, then you add the music, or what's your process for writing?
It's a very difficult question, the one about positive things. The most positive one I can think of recently, they're all metaphors, like the stories are the things that, but they're never, you know, I'm not exactly Captain Chuckles, am I? You know, I mean, unfortunately. There was a solo single a while back called Silly Pretty Thing. And inevitably it would be about one of the kids, you know, and just, you know, it's, you know, get up, another perfect day of spring is here, you know, and last night the moon got drunk and dropped its clothes into the street, you know, and a lot happened. If you know the solo stuff, there are 2 bookend albums, Sex, Age and Death, which is, for me, unlistenable because it's too accurate and it's horror. And the other is the bookend of that, How to Compose Popular Songs That Will Sell. And that, to me, is about love and finally understanding that that's where everything is at. That, as I said at the time, life without love is meaningless. And the dawning, the stupid, too late dawning realization of that. It sounds like they're, you know, that they were happy songs. No, they weren't. Silly Pretty Thing is, you know, but if you know, even if they sound chirpy, they're not. But nonetheless, it's positive. Back in the Rat songs, I'm trying to think of ones that you really have to get inside yourself to find the happy thing. You know, I could construct a happy song, but if I'm using a metaphor like Ava Brown or Me and Howard Hughes, which is about me and being isolated, rather, things like that, they're or a conversation. Like I remember there was a song called Nice and Neat, which is a conversation I had in the kitchen, an argument with a mate who'd become a priest. You know, so they're not chirpy, they're just songs about something that came into your head and become a song. So how does that process start? I do write words and words and words and words. I have a notebook really beside me all the time, but even back in the day, you see, I go back to the beginning of this when there was no one in the house, and things would pop into my head and I'd no one to say them to. Never mind talk. We didn't talk about things, but I'd no one to say them to. There was no one there, literally. So I'd write things down. And also I was in a panic. I was in a panic of failure, you know, failing every exam. And, you know, when I became a teenager, I was really a pain. My father and I, we did not see eye to eye on anything. Later, of course, you know, we were great friends and he was a great guy, but back then it was not good at all. And so I'd write in a panic. I'd write endless notes. I mean, some literally are illegible. They're just panic scrolls. And so that's always been my go-to resource. I read books and I make jot notes about a thought that enters my head as I read a line, or actually just copy out the line. Maybe I'll use it. There are just boxes of this shit everywhere. I don't know why I even bother keeping them, because I go back to that spark off something. Well, sometimes it does. But more often than not, I don't know what that's about. So usually it'll just come at that moment. I'll be noodling away on the guitar and a line will happen, and then other lines, and I'm onto something is what I'll think. And nowadays with your phone, I'll just turn on the phone and I'll just make a memo of the idea. But often it ends up the same result. I go back and there's this fucking racket on the phone. I'm going, what's that about? What was I thinking of? You know, what am I trying to say? So I don't like the process. It's not easy for me. I don't like going up to Pete's. I mumble a lot. I like it, or playing it to the guys in the band. It was excruciating. And I asked other guys, like, you know, I've literally asked Bruce Springsteen, like, you know, are you embarrassed when you do it? And he goes, yeah, it's fucking awful. They all just look at you and go, okay, what chords? What is it like that? No, kind of, can you do it? It's crap. But beyond playing it to them, I think now that the lyrics come later, because I've got better at guitar, and that's an impediment, you know, it's the Lou Reed thing. One chord perfect, two chords, three chords jazz, you know. You can't unremember, you know, as Towns, etc. So once you're at a seventh, you're done. You know, that's the next chord after the major. You know, once you learn the seventh, it's all over. Give up rock and roll, you know. So they're terribly long answers to your questions because they're terribly difficult.
Yeah, and actually, I think the book is so illuminating about your creative process, and thank you for going into it in much more detail here with us. It's been such a pleasure to have you here. I love the book, and yeah, good luck with it, and good luck with the new album and the tour that's coming up in the autumn. And thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest at Salon Book Club Live. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. We really appreciate your time. If you do want to buy a book from us, then you can buy it from us. We have our own bookshop and you don't need to go elsewhere. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your beautiful questions and have a lovely evening. This salon is now closed.